Good morning, everyone. We're Zooming, right? I want to say hello also and welcome to our Mexico campuses because we have a nice group connecting from our Centro Universitario Incarnate Word in Mexico City and our Campus Bajío in Irapuato. But welcome to the 2024 UIW Hispanic Heritage Symposium. This is the first of 6 sessions that will take place over the course of 3 days. And during these 6 sessions, we will hear 14 terrific presentations. Today's presentation is longer than it's exceptional because it's a topic that requires more than the standard time. And so today's presentation will take up the entire session. Before we get started with the program, I just want to say a few words of acknowledgement, well-deserved acknowledgement. Everyone who has participated thus far in the Hispanic Heritage Month celebration, either by attending or helping put on an event, and also thanks to the committee that helped plan the overall month under the leadership of this man right here, Dr. Arturo Chavez. Thank you, Arturo, for that. And I also want to thank Christine Cisco and Dean Tracy Mendoza for making this space available to us, and also from the library, Katrina Grivich, who put together a great publications event on Hispanic Heritage publications that I encourage you to go take a look at, but we placed it inside the library. My man, Adriana Aguilera, Piedras Negras. Shout out to Piedras Negras, Eagle Pass, the border, La Frontera, the borderlands, and Nick Moore, who's not here right now, but our experts from Media Services, of course, and also Matt Garza and Schaefer Frost of Facilities Event Management for always helping us out. And then the programming committee of the symposium, Dr. Javier Claver, Dean of the College of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences, Dr. Laura Lopez, who is Assistant Professor of English, also for CHAS, Dr. Leticia Vargas, Associate Professor and Course Site Director for the Office of Clinical Affairs at the UIW School of Osteopathic Medicine. Dr. Alicia Rubio, Undergraduate Director and Professor of Finance for the HEB School of Business and Administration. Dr. Gabriel Saxton Ruiz here with us today, Professor of Spanish for CHAS. And then my good friend and right-hand man for this event, Mr. Teófilo Reyes, Assistant Director of Leadership and Global Engagement at Link Center for Civic Leadership and Sustainability. And then I also want to thank the 14 members of the UIW community who will be presenting. Each one of these presenters has a super full agenda and along with their responsibilities. So, really, I think their willingness to give time to this event just speaks about who they are and about their appreciation of the importance of the topic. And let me thank all of you here attending today, either in person or virtually. I know you too have full agendas as we head into the second part of the semester, so I really appreciate you making time to be here with us. So it's my pleasure to welcome everyone and kick off the symposium with a special welcome from UIW President, Dr. Tom Evans. Tom is someone who really understands that our Hispanic heritage is a fundamental pillar of UIW's unique strength. I've been at UIW myself only for a little over 5 years, but I've known Tom Evans for it's been over 20 years, and from the beginning, before we worked together, he always took great interest in my Hispanic heritage and just in international and intercultural matters. So he really believes in this. So really happy that he's going to deliver our video welcome today. Adrian.
Cardinals and friends, welcome to the Hispanic Heritage Symposium presented by the Lewis Center of the Americas at the University of the Incarnate Word. I'm Tom Evans, president of this wonderful university, and it is my pleasure to help kick off this 3-day event that culminates UIW's Hispanic Heritage Month celebration. Over the course of the symposium, presenters from throughout our academic programs and schools will shed light on our rich cultural tapestry. We will discover more about diversity of Hispanic identities in the Cardinal community. We will learn about the impact that our students, faculty, and staff are making in communities in the US and Latin America. And we will explore Hispanic heritage through academic curriculum. As we do, we will also come to better appreciate who we are as an institution. Ours is a ministry with deep roots in our region and whose branches extend across the border into Latin America and more broadly around the world. UIW is also proudly Hispanic serving, and we honor our shared heritage and celebrate how it will shape the future. Our symposium was the result of great collaboration from leaders and educators throughout our UIW system in the US and in Mexico. Thank you, Dr. Hoyle and the Lewis Center of the Americas for leading the planning and organization that has resulted in this terrific program. I also extend my gratitude to the College of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences and the Etling Center for helping bring this event to fruition. Special thanks are also due to the staff and faculty who serve on the programming committee, Dr. Javier Clavere, Dean of CHAS, Dr. Alicia Rubio of the HEB School of Business and Administration, Dr. Leticia Vargas from our School of Osteopathic Medicine, Teofilio Reyes from the Etling Center, Dr. Laura Lopez from the English Department, and Dr. Gabriel Saxton Ruiz from our Spanish Department. I hope you enjoy the exciting programming to come. The stories and experiences you will hear reflect the vibrancy of our community, will expand our perspectives, and will ultimately bring us closer together as one word. Praise be the incarnate word.
Man, thank you for that, Dr. Evans. Now I want to introduce another UIW leader whose never-ending commitment to causes and initiatives in the name of peace and justice sets an example for us all. And she is someone who for decades has been passionate about Hispanic culture and heritage. Not only has she pursued formal study of Hispanic culture at a very high level of scholarship, but someone who engages with Hispanic and pre-Hispanic culture in her everyday life and who has incorporated it into her own identity and person as a longstanding South Texas resident. Sister Martha Ann Kirk, give her a warm welcome to deliver our opening prayer.
I pray at the parish of Mission Concepcion, founded in 1731, and the Franciscans wrote diaries and records, and they talked about the indigenous people dancing their prayer. And you can come see the displays that we have now. We continue. Every December, we have 400 to 600 Matachinas dancers on our campus. I'm sorry I could not bring the 400 of them into the room, but I will dance. And prayer is relevant. Prayer is relevant, whatever culture you're in, Hindu, Muslim, Jewish, Buddhist, Native American, prayer is relevant. Yesterday, my brother with 600 acres of land and 100 cattle said to me, Martha, pray for rain. We are having an Aztec prayer for rain. Secondly, prayer is relevant when cultures are suffering and dying. We remember that many Native American cultures died. And today, October 7th, I have been getting all of this news and email. Let us think. We are glad that the Jewish culture was not wiped out by Hitler and the Nazis. And today, we are praying that the Palestinian culture does not get destroyed. A message from the Pope this morning said over 50,000 people have been killed. We pray these Aztec poems, these Aztec prayers. Prayer is always relevant.
Generous and compassionate, giver of all sustenance. Lord, let it be that you comfort the earth and all those that live on the face of the earth. Sighing greatly and in anguish, from my heart I call out. I implore you, spirits of water that lie in the four world quarters, the east, the west, the north, the south. You that dwell in the hollows of the earth, in the air, in the high peaks, in the deep caves, to come comfort this poor people, to water the earth. For the eyes of those that live on earth, men, beasts, birds, are fixed in hope on your persons. O God of ours, let it be that you come. They shall not wither, my flowers. They shall not cease, my songs. I, the singer, lift them up. They are scattered, they spread about. Even though on earth my flowers may wither and yellow, they will be carried there to the innermost house of the bird with the golden feathers.
So much to our events, sister, and to our community with everything you do. And I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. And it's really a pleasure and a privilege to engage with you so regularly. It's really great. Thank you so much. We're going to proceed with our presentation. And it's really a pleasure for me to introduce my friend and my colleague, Dr. Arturo Chavez. And we've had so many conversations about our Hispanic heritage, and now it's just really nice for him to be sharing some of his wisdom and his insight and his perspective with you for his conversation and plática, understanding the diversity of Hispanic identities in today's global society. Arturo?
Thank you, Rafael. Buenas tardes. So good to be with you. I was asked to talk about the complexities of Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, Latine identity in today's world. And so as I reflected, I would like to take perhaps an indirect path there. I'd like to talk about the history of how we as Latinos, as Hispanics, have understood race in our communities. So please bear with me. I usually teach this in a semester class. I'm going to go rather quickly through it, okay? So first, culture. I love this definition by David Abalos, that culture is a network of stories that hang together to create this cosmos of meaning. I just love that because I can picture the stars. And I remember my grandmother, and in West Texas, you're crazy if you go out during the day. But at night, everyone goes out because it's nice and cool, and there begin the stories. I love this picture because it reminds me of my abuelita, and I love the image of fire as a gift of culture. There's no perfect culture, but there's no perfect family, but it is a gift. It is a gift. And this continues to be passed on from one generation to another. In some generations, it dies down. It's almost just like ashes. But in other generations, when we recognize the gift of it, it can set fire, it can ignite it once more. This is my bisabuelita, Micaela Perez Machado. We're from Namiquipa on my mother's side in Chihuahua, in a mountain. And Micaela, or as everyone called her, Mama Kela, was very important to the village of Namiquipa. She was a rezadora, a praying woman, and she was a partera, a woman who delivered the babies, a midwife. And so my grandmother would tell us stories about her. And even though I never met her, Mama Kela was born, no one knows exactly when, but in the mid-1850s. And this is her towards the end of her life when she died in 1958. So I was born in 61. So I didn't get to meet her, but I can tell you that through those stories, I know her. I know her at a very deep level. And so I want us to think of culture. I invite you to think of culture not as some sociological, kind of fact or abstract notion, but something that is within us, something that makes us tick, something that makes us get up in the morning. And that culture has a geography. So even though we've been gone from West Texas since I was 8 years old, whenever I go to the mountains, something happens to me. I come alive in a different way. So what is the geography of your soul? So let's talk a little bit about terms. Hispanic, we'll start there. As the comedians say, somewhere in the 1970s, 80s, the US government panicked and came up with a name for us because we were growing by leaps and bounds. So Hispanic was invented as a way of grouping together people with very different cultures, but in some ways related to speaking Spanish or connection to Spain. Many people don't like this term. They feel it's imposed on them, and it ignores our indigenous roots that Martha reminded us of. Latino, Latina came in the 80s, I remember, and instead of focusing on language, it focuses on a geographic area, a larger category of Latin America and Caribbean. But the problem that many of us come as we come to more inclusive ways of thinking of language is that it is gendered, huh? You have to say Latino, Latina, Mexican American, Chicano. I bring this up because the majority of us in this country have Mexican roots. But so when we identify ourselves, we usually say we're Mexicanos or we're Mexican American or we're Chicanos. And this is true of all Hispanic people. When you ask them their identity, they're going to talk mainly about their ethnicity. Huh? And so Chicano is more politically charged. I'm not going to go through the history lesson here. Latinx is another kind of an attempt to solve this exclusive gendered language, huh? But it came from an English-speaking world. And so Latinx kind of opens up the identity to more than just male or female, and opens that up. But in Spanish, the X doesn't make sense. Latinxi or Mexicano, so it's kind of a J sound. What seems to be used more and more these days is Latine. And also it's kind of this gender neutral form for the word Latino. And this was created by Spanish speakers. And so there's it flows easily off the tongue for Spanish speakers, huh? Okay, that's really not what I'm going to talk about, but I did feel the need to at least begin that way. So all of these different identifiers have to do with how historically we understand race. And if you're like most of us who are educated in the US or in Mexico, we learned somewhere along the way that race has to do with biology, that somehow we could know it by looking at someone's appearance. I know I go give talks in different places that maybe haven't seen many Hispanic people. They often come up to me at the break and they say, "Where are you from?" I say, "Oh, I'm from San Antonio." "No, but where are you from?" Go, "Well, my parents are from Mexico. I grew up here." "Really? I didn't know Mexicans were tall." So we all have those stereotypes, whatever culture you're from. But this notion, and I call it a myth because it's not to say it's not real, but it is so real, so big, that it has permeated our understanding of race. But what is the biological evidence for this? You may recall about 20 years ago, a lot of work was done on the human genome. And so one of the fascinating parts is that if you strictly look at the DNA of two human beings, we're practically 99.9% identical. So the question is, why is that 0.1% so important? Why do we put so much emphasis on that 0.1%? That little part of our DNA that makes us different. Well, it's about what's underneath the iceberg. It's about the profound historical iceberg that has created this illusion of race. Going all the way back, not forever. No, people have hated people who are different since Adam and Eve. That has existed, sadly. But the way we understand race and the way we experience racism is not that old in the history of humankind. It dates back to the Renaissance, and I won't, again, do a history lesson, but just to refresh your memory that this was a real earth-shattering time of new discoveries, of global exploration, of science, okay? And so as you know, our European ancestors, if you have European ancestors, were looking at the world in a different way. Their technologies, and this science, did the Mayans have science before now? Did the Egyptians? Absolutely. But this discovery of the world in the way that our European ancestors were calling science became the way to look at the world. So the humanism of this time put the human being at the center. So what did our ancestors from Europe see when they encountered the other? This is a picture, an illustration from a map of the time. It's Amerigo Vespucci, who, that's how we get the name America, waking up America. And I think that this illustration of the time, I don't know how much you can see it, but suffice to say that the terms in which our ancestors from Europe and our ancestors from what we now call America were not on an equal footing. Our indigenous and African ancestors were disempowered by this encounter. So what were they seeing? They were seeing the world through their eyes. As you can see this chart that, before we had the internet and mimes, these charts were able to kind of, in one fell swoop, it's called panoptical time and categories, that in one view, we could place everyone in a perceived level of civilization. And so the chart goes from animal to the pinnacle of what our ancestors saw as the highest form of being human. Now notice Anne McClintock says, this is all done with a privileged invisibility. In other words, we categorize you, you don't categorize us. And it's this original sin that has kept us in this systemic disempowering of generations of our ancestors. Race, then, if it's not biology, what is it? Well, it's a social construction, but not just a neutral social construction. Haney Lopez says that it is a constant contest of systems looking for meaning. He says social meanings connect our faces to our souls. Very, very profound. And the way I am understanding it more is that race is not a noun, but a verb. And race is not my white face or my black face or my brown face. It's what happens to you when you see my brown face. It's what happens to me when I see my brown face. So it's this way of relating. It's like language, huh? Race is like language. If we've agreed to speak English, then we've all agreed that this is a table. And I can call it a microphone all I want, but you won't understand me. So too, race is a language that we have all agreed to, and that quite frankly, we need to kind of disrupt. We need to redefine who we are on our own terms. So Virgilio Elizondo, in his classic book, The Galilean Journey, talks about the birth of our people, Latin American people, Latino people, Hispanic people, through mestizaje, the mixture, the blending of different peoples into a new people. Again, he reminds us that this first mestizaje of the conquest was not neutral. And it was, as Justo Gonzalez, the historian, would say, that the tragic story of our Latina culture is that our great-great-great-grandfathers raped our great-great-grandmothers. And it is in this sexual violence that colonization was perpetrated. So this first mestizaje established in what we now call Mexico, but this was replicated throughout Latin America, a racial caste system that was not only racist, but sexist. So as women begin to arrive in Mexico, remember our grandfathers came without women, their offspring were called creoles. The peninsulares were from the peninsula of Mexico. In the beginning, the indigenous people were enslaved, but then the Pope said, you know, I agree with the best theologians. Indians do have souls, so you can't enslave them. And I won't be facetious here. So that began the original sin of African Black slavery. And if we can't enslave the Indians, who can we enslave? And this is what happened. But within 100 years after the conquest, we were a mixture, a mestizaje. And what determined your place in that hierarchy was skin color. Okay? And so the lighter you were, the higher you could go. The darker you were, the lower you were. Unless, because it is a sexist system, if your father claims you. So as you go up in the system, it doesn't really matter who your mother is. It matters who your father is. But the further you go down, it really matters who your mother is. Because if you look more like your indigenous mother, you can't be enslaved. But if you look more like your African grandmother, you could be enslaved. So again, this original sin was reinforced through religious understanding of race. And so these are paintings that were in churches. So a Spanish and an indigenous person produce a mestizo, a castiza, a mulatto. But look here, if a mestizo marries lower in the caste system, the racial names or terms are animal, coyote, or lobo. So what is the result of this, brothers and sisters? The tragic truth of our history, the historical context of this first mestizaje, is a Holocaust that we have forgotten about. Scholars conservatively estimate that 30 million indigenous people were dismembered, were killed, or died of diseases within that first 100 years of contact. Okay, I don't want to bring you too far down. There is hope. Unless we think this is ancient history, this is a picture of my family. I was blessed among women all my life. And like most Latino families, we were a rainbow skin color. So some of us were, teníamos más café y otros más leche. And in my family, my little sister Angelica lived up to that stereotype of angel with her almost auburn hair and creamy skin. And on the other side of that rainbow was Gracielita in the green dress there. She had the skin of our indigenous and African grandmothers. She had the hair of our indigenous and African grandmothers. But when my tias would come, my abuelita, or perfect strangers, who do you think they would notice? Mira qué bonita esa güerita. Parece americana. You'll have no trouble passing Angelica back and forth from the border, Berta. Just put a pretty dress on her. They'll think she's American. And with Gracielita, mira, qué bonita, pero prieta. Or curiosita. Keep her out of the sun, Berta. Keep her out of the sun. She'll get darker. Se va a hacer morada. Yeah. So those of you in the auditorium, you can relate to this, can't you? Because it's something that is with us. And tragically, what it has led to is so many of our people being ashamed of who they are, wanting to leave that behind. This was further reinforced by what Virgil Elizondo calls the second mestizaje. And this is the Mexican-American experience, but those of you who might be listening as Puerto Ricans or Cubans or in Latin America, you had your own mestizaje as you encountered the United States. And before I go any further, I want everyone to know I love my country and I love my church, actually. But the way that we love has to be in truth. And we have to see our history for what it is. We're living at a time where telling history is illegal in some states. Okay, I got to remember not to lecture here. So the racial caste system of New England was different. These ancestors, and I call them my ancestors culturally, came as families. They came not, they came seeking religious freedom. They were escaping popes and kings and queens. And they already had these notions of pure races. Huh? But there's always these contested systems when we make up these racial categories. And for these pilgrims, these founders of our country, the contested systems were the philosophies. So if what John Locke says is true, then why do we have slaves? So this original sin was also the United States' original sin. And so this philosophy of independence and human rights, human freedoms, as wonderful as it is, it didn't jive with what these ancestors were doing in terms of slavery. In New England, races caste system looked like this. So looks pretty much the same, huh? Except it's a random system. Sociologically, we think of the United States as a random system in this sense, that it's a federation of states. And each state has a certain level of autonomy, actually quite a bit autonomy. And so in the beginning, of course, it was white men who were landowners, and at the very bottom, Black slaves. But in between was this notion of whiteness. Before this time, people didn't call themselves white. They were English, they were Dutch, they were Christian. White took the colonies by storm because it was a way then to distinguish oneself from those being enslaved or those being exterminated, the native peoples that were already here. So until very recently, I think 1952 is pretty recent, we had this law in the book that if you wanted to become a US citizen naturalized, you had to be a white man. So in the beginning, any Irish here? So when your ancestors came, were they considered white? No. They were Catholic, They smelled of the potato famine. They were poor, and they had been colonized by England already. And they were competing for jobs, as some states were freeing enslaved people, and other enslaved people were escaping, and they were flooding the cities of Boston and New York and Chicago and competing. But somehow the Irish became white. There's whole books on this, okay? The same thing happened with Italians and other European groups who could assimilate, But there were people who were here very early in the history of our country who were responsible for the growth of our country, like the Chinese. They came over as children, maybe with their parents, or maybe they were born here, but they couldn't prove they were born here. Does that sound Latino enough for you? So as they began, the railroad was built, these cities of San Francisco and California, they wanted to be citizens. They wanted to be engaged in the life there. But these people could not assimilate. They had to go to court to try to prove that they were white. And so critical race theorists, which is illegal now in some states, have tracked transcripts of court hearings of these people. And in 1878, in some court, it's a random system, it was determined Chinese were not white. Okay, and so if Chinese are not white, Japanese are not white. Asian Indians, sometimes they were white, sometimes they were not. It's a random system. And look at the times, World War I, no, they're not white. Okay, so this has been the original sin of our countries, and it's fueled by religious ideas that God somehow wants this, that He has destined us for this. And we do it because they're not doing anything with the land. We've got to improve it. And not only the land, we need to improve these people. We need to make them like us. So Mexican Americans went through this same thing. They also, after the Guadalupe Hidalgo treaty was signed, as soon as the ink was dry, the promises were null. They were nullified. So remember my little story of Graciela and Angelica. So if you could pass for white and you had some class, meaning, some social power, then you could pass as white and have some of the benefits there. But if you looked more like your indigenous and African ancestors, then you would see these signs and you know that they were meant for you. My father remembers these signs in El Paso. I was born near El Paso in Fabens, but I was born into legal apartheid. We knew we had to live on this side of the town. We even knew we went to the Mexican Catholic Church, not the white Catholic Church. So this is still with us. And what it has done is so many of us have felt that maybe if I leave my culture behind, when I was a little boy, they spanked us if we spoke Spanish in school. That's not legal anymore, but we still tell people that they're not quite right until they leave that stuff behind. So I want you to watch this short film and then we'll have some conversation.
I'm Apache, but really that's the government's name because they can't say Zithli.
I think the Latino identity is pretty confusing to me because oftentimes I find it in a little checkbox on a form and I'm confused on whether I should put Latino or Hispanic, but I'm Mexican.
As Latin Americans, as Hispanics in the US, there's a community that gets built regardless of which specific country you're coming from.
In our history is a history of African people, indigenous people, Europeans, conquistadores, all these different people colliding, many times not with their consent. So that informs all these loaded issues people have.
It's like navigating three identities. If you're from the States, you're American, you're Black, and you're Latina. And furthermore, wherever country that you identify in coming from. And that's a lot to navigate.
But at this point in my life, I actually don't identify as Guatemalan, and it's something that I guess a lot of like young immigrants sort of feel, where there's this saying like, ni de aquí, ni de allá, not from there, not from here.
In trying to blend in with the culture in America, I gave up a lot of what I grew up with. Maybe I saw it as something that was kind of shameful or in the way. I wanted to dress like my friends in America. I wanted to talk like them. I wanted to be like them, listen to the same music. I started listening to country music.
I got all these crazy questions like, did you come here in a canoe? And do you know what snow is? And do you live in a hut in Puerto Rico?
I thought my name was Spick until I was about 13. And that was my first awareness that race was an issue.
People say, oh, you look like a white dude. In some contexts, not in all contexts, depends where I am, depends who I'm with, depends whole lot of things. Depends what language I'm speaking, but however I look, when I leave my name, I can't get a phone call back about an apartment in New York City. And this isn't like 10 places I call, this is like 30.
And I remember telling a kid one time, I was like, let me tell you, the Ku Klux Klan comes here and they see your last name, you're going too, bro. You know, and the kids are like, what are you talking about? And it was like a big thing.
People generally, you know, unless I speak Spanish, you know, people assume right away, I mean, that I'm African American, that I'm Black. You know, I mean, it's, you know, just one of those things. It may be the deep voice, it may be the color of my skin.
Because I talk white, I'm not Dominican, or I'm not Black, or I'm not Afro-Latina, or whoever people perceive me as of being. And that hurt, and that still hurts.
Because one of my daughters is lighter than the other, they had Blackness issues. And I remember my oldest daughter telling my youngest daughter that she was Black and that her hair, she said something, and I remember crying like immediately, like, oh my God. No. And I had to sit them down and talk to them about our roots and that everything that they learned from the family was wrong.
I feel like I wanted more of my culture. You know, I grew up, there was a point I stopped speaking Spanish to her and I still don't speak to her in Spanish. So I feel like something was lost, and I don't know if it was just because she was busy raising 5 kids and didn't really think about culture in that way and how I would come to identify myself.
Growing up, you know, like this, as you know, as a young teenager, I told people I was Puerto Rican, which is completely, you know, which is right. But at a particular point when I became a little more politicized, I was definitely more of a Black nationalist than I was a Puerto Rican nationalist. Maybe because the concept of Black nationalism and the Black liberation movement is so much more accessible. There isn't a language issue. So yeah, I totally was reading Malcolm and Marcus and James Baldwin and Huey Newton before I read any of the Puerto Rican nationalists.
Either you're Black or you're white, and if you're like kind of in the middle, you kind of like don't want to be in the middle. A lot of us want to be white. But we're still brown. We're still color. You know, we still have color. You know, we're still, according to what the institution is telling us, what race is based on your skin color. So you're like, I'm brown. So that's kind of like where it came. Like I'm not Black. and I'm not white, and I don't want to be white. And so I'm kind of brown, and this is kind of like a thing that's there.
If you are closer to being white, you are supreme. If you are not, you are less than. And to me, that's how I've understood it. And that's why I think it's very important that Latinos who look like me say, you identify as Latino, cool. Colombiano, cool. Whatever else. But you benefit from light skin privilege. The fact that you have ojos claros, people want to fetishize that, understand what that means. However much I might want to say, oh my gosh, I'm so special because I have green eyes, you're perpetuating white supremacy by running with that.
I'll talk to a young girl, a young teenager, and she'll say, I'm not white enough to fit into mainstream society. I'm not Black American enough to fit in that, in that faction of society. And I'm like, but you know what? You're the best person to be kind of like a connector between both, because in you is everything. And being Latino in an American kind of New World way is basically being a physical embodiment of how America began as we know it. So you're every woman. So for me, being Latino is being phenomenal.
Continue to repeat it, and we don't do to others what has been done to us. So we'd like to hear from you all now. What speaks to your experience of what I shared, or this little film that we had? So let's hear from some of you. Anyone want to jump in? Brave souls, especially students. We'd love to hear from you.
And
Can you relate
I have
to
a
any of this?
microphone here I can give you.
So for me, growing up, I did not speak Spanish. My mom doesn't speak Spanish. My grandma did not know Spanish well enough to be able to teach it to my mom. My grandpa, he grew up in the Valley, and his family is originally from Monterrey, Mexico. And so they were conditioned not to speak Spanish because this was in like the 1950s, 60s, 70s. So it's kind of frowned upon. So that's how I ended up not speaking Spanish. So I was told I was not Mexican enough because I didn't speak Spanish. So to bite back, I learned in high school. Not easy, so I still struggle now. But even then, I'm not considered like enough because of the fact I did not grow up in Mexico, or did not grow up traditionally Mexican. I'm very much Mexican American. And then whenever people look at me and my cousin Leah very much fits the white passing narrative because she's got fair skin, she's got hazel eyes, and she's got light brown hair. And her hair is straight. My hair is naturally curly. I have brown eyes. My skin is a lot darker than hers. So there's a clear, distinct difference between the two of us. And it's very obvious whenever like we're together, people would think, oh, that's just her friend. I'm like, no, that's my cousin. So it's very different between the two of us. And she doesn't speak Spanish either, just because her mom is my aunt, so she didn't know Spanish either.
Yeah.
So in my family, I'm the only one that does. So I often have to translate sometimes.
Yeah.
But it's very challenging to be in that scenario,
Yes.
having to be the one that is constantly looked to in those scenarios.
Yeah. So much of our culture is passed through the language. And so just saying things in Spanish, it's a whole different meaning, and yeah, how we judge one another, about whether we're Mexican enough or Latino enough. Thank you for sharing that. Other comments? We have someone here. Tell us your name, by the way.
My name is Roberto Fajardo. I'm a professor at the University of the Incarnate Word School of Osteopathic Medicine. And I'd never, that last video spoke to me because it's just not something I've ever really talked about. I'll talk about it today when I give a little chat in a little while. But I am the only member of my entire family tree born outside of Colombia. And many things in that video spoke to me. One, the white privilege of being rather pale-faced, but coming from a Colombian family and having Colombian citizenship has allowed me to navigate higher education in Texas and certain parts of Texas in ways that I don't think others have had the privilege, even though if you look at my ID card, it says Roberto Jose Fajardo, and it's pretty clear most people can't say my name, my last name especially. At the same time, I had no control over the history of my birth. My parents had a Horatio Alger sort of dream, and that makes me the only one born outside of Colombia. And I'll say it in my talk, and so I'll give away the lead here. But I can't tell you how many times growing up I was asked whether I had cocaine, marijuana, if I knew Pablo Escobar, or why would I ever travel to a country that was so violent? And very lovingly, if I traveled to Colombia, which I did every year almost since I was born, my cousins would either call me cowboy, Walker Texas Ranger, or if they really wanted to just be efficient, they just say gringo, and let go of the funny terms. Yeah. And it was all endearing, and I've learned to live with it. But I think it was always difficult to be in the liminal space of two cultures, not really belonging to either one, and not being sure what that identity was until I grew up and really had to come to terms with it and do things that I'll talk about later that allowed me to sort of accept it. Great. Accept where it was. But I think that issue of the white privilege is something that's really important to discuss and realize, to not forget our parents' journey, our parents' struggles, and that the privilege I have just because I look like my father more so and I'm pale skinned, whereas my mother is a little darker. And in this society, that gave me access that maybe friends and family with different historical origins would not have had, or maybe not have had.
Yeah. Liminality, that in-between space. Yes, right here, right behind you. Your name, please?
My name's Christopher Rizzo, and I'd say racism's a big thing. I'm from Del Rio, but I moved to Odessa for obviously my dad, we needed money. And I'd say the struggle with I look pale, but I can speak fluent Spanish, but my hair is curly, so I'm not white. But I don't look Mexican. So I've gotten Italian before, but I'm not Italian. And where I'm from, so Odessa, it's predominantly, or it's mostly Mexican, right? But to fit in, racism plays a big factor. So a lot of Mexicans are racist towards each other. So I've gotten racist comments toward myself, to my family, that I'm not Mexican, that I'm not this, that I'm not that. And that if you want to fit in, you have to give up your culture. I've seen many families give up. So other Mexicans are racist towards other Mexicans no matter what, just so they can get the higher pay grade. So an example would be my dad. They thought he was white. They found out he was Mexican. So now they're not paying him what he should be paid.
Yeah.
And I think that's about it.
Well, I thank you so much for sharing that. And, the racial caste system only works if all the people underneath believe in it and they treat the person underneath a little worse. Huh? So it's very important. And as we look at identity and the complexity of identity, we have to see what's behind it. We have to see how identifiers of race, of culture, have privileged some and have disempowered others. Would you like to say anything back there? Yeah, I thought you raised your hand. Yeah. Tell us your name. And by the way, our first speaker was Claudia. So.
My name's Gabriella Luevano. I kind of just stumbled in here, but being here for the last bit was really impactful and to me still. And I guess I'm just very light skinned, but my features also surprisingly, believe it or not, have had me kind of pointed out. From my nose or my eye shape, I guess. But I just thought it was like interesting to listen to your experience in school because my grandparents also had that experience. My grandpa, he was kicked out of school for speaking Spanish and at when he was in third grade. And so he worked out in fields since then. And then similar situation with my grandmother as well. But they worked very hard and they were very good people. And then again, like I come from San Marcos and my family didn't grow up speaking Spanish because they were afraid to speak it and they didn't want us to have that similar hardship in a place that was like very like racist and segregated and whatnot. But yeah, so I kind of do sometimes think it would be cool if like I mean, because not every, I mean, there's trouble within every community. And I think it's really vital to uplift each other and empower each other to just like encourage each other to be like more in touch and in tune with our roots and culture and that we are valuable. And I just really love coming to all of these like Hispanic heritage events because it makes me feel closer to others. And I really appreciate hearing everyone's perspectives and whatnot.
Well, thank you. We appreciate hearing yours. Thank you for sharing that. I just want to close with just something for us to think about. Oops, it's not going. Yeah, could you keep clicking? Thank you. So why are we having this conversation? Because we're UIW, because we're the University of Incarnate Word, and we were founded by a courageous group of women who came to this city in the aftermath, the bloody, chaotic aftermath of the Civil War. And they started a little clinic. They weren't nurses, but the bishop needed them to come. And they came because they were convinced that God was present in each person. And when they opened their little clinic, they put an advertisement in the San Antonio Express News. This is how courageous they were, that they would serve people of any race and any religion. This was legal apartheid time, beginning of Jim Crow. So it's in our DNA. These are the roots. These are the roots of who we are. And even if Texas has made a law that we can't have DEI offices in the state, in public institutions, even if they were to say you can't have them if you receive any government funding, I believe we would still speak because this is part of our mission, social justice. Could you advance it? So let's go a little bit deeper as we conclude. One more, please. So what is the journey from here? We know where we've been, but where do we need to go? So for those of us who were privileged by this history, and you know, we've talked about white privilege, but there's other kinds of privileges, you know, having you know, a certain body and body abilities. You know, those people of our community who've been privileged by all kinds of their identity, but it's a commitment to the healing process of self-examination, of seeking truth, move beyond denial, move beyond defense, and guilt, because a lot of us who have been privileged, we feel this sense of guilt. Guilt is good if we do something different. But if we don't, it just becomes shame. It just becomes poisonous shame. So look at the history of our people, see it for what it is, practice empathy, forgiveness, compassion, be empowered, decenter the inflated self, meaning learn cultural humility, that you are not at the center of the world, and a willingness to accept your power, our power, and to accept that privilege as a way to find creative ways for social change. One more, please. For those of us who've been disinherited, as Howard Thurman would say, he has this beautiful book called Jesus and the Disinherited. And it's a book that Martin Luther King carried in his pocket because it was so powerful. So we too must commit to the healing process. It isn't easy to tell our stories. Those of you who shared, thank you. That's not easy to do. But we have to find these places where we can share these stories, where we can create a new cosmos of meaning. We need to move beyond the fear, beyond the shame, beyond the deception and the anger. And by deception, I'm referring to Howard Thurman again, of how he says that those who have been disinherited have to do whatever it takes to stay alive. So see the gifts and the limitations of one's culture. Practice empathy, forgiveness, compassion. Does that sound familiar? We all have to do that. And be empowered. Decenter the victim. Tell your stories, as painful as they are, but also tell the stories of how you are being empowered. One more, please. That's it. Thank you so much.
Ms. Mary. All right, how are we doing? Oh, yes, ma'am.
This has been such excellent content. I invite you to continue thinking about things like this. On Saturday morning, November 9th, we have a workshop called Do We Love Enough to Listen? And we're going to ponder the story of a descendant of an Apache, and we're going to ponder my story of privilege. My family was given 680 acres of land taken from the Comanches, Apaches, indigenous people. So these are important conversations. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Let's also give a round of applause to the students that also shared as well, because public speaking is something we're always working on and stuff like that. So thank you. So how many of you are liking what you're hearing? One person. Oh, okay, there you go. So the hands work. All right. So how many feel that this conversation should continue? Nice, because it is. All right. So we're about to go into a break very soon. But how many feel like some other people, you may have had these conversations offline with some friends or maybe some peers who've had this conversation probably outside of this room? Some of us, right? Maybe through frustration or maybe through innovation or maybe through some sort. But if there's some other people that you've had this conversation with, I challenge you to invite them now. Okay. So all of us have phones. All of us can text someone. It's like, hey, I know you missed session 1, but I attended session 1. And trust me, this conversation is worth hearing. So can you make it at 1:30? And then you entice them with the pan dulce that's outside. Okay. But they're like, oh, it's going to make me sleepy. Well, we have café de olla also. Okay. So we balance both out. So we're about to head into a break. During that break, you have a couple homework assignments real quick. Eat some pan, drink some coffee, invite some friends, and come back. Okay. It's not over. We have some great presenters that are coming up next. And you're not going to want to miss that part of the conversation. Those online, thank you for zooming in. You could take your restroom break and then come right back. So Dr. Hoyle, did you have anything else?
No, I just want to say also thank you. I'm so happy with the conversations and the comments, and this could go on. I mean, I really wish we had an hour to just really get and do a deep dive, but we have other sessions coming up, like Dale said. And so please come back and please continue to have these conversations. Be confident about who you are. Be confident in your identity. You may not even know, like right now, that, hey, I've found myself. I know who I am exactly, but you will get there over the course of time. And when our backgrounds are complex, sometimes it's a little bit confusing. And when you have an aunt, a tia that, you know, calls you a pocha because you don't know how to speak Spanish right, or you, whatever, like it's okay. That's who you are. And as you grow, you're going to find your identity. You're going to find find who you are. And you're in a great place right here. UIW San Antonio. We got great role models that have all that, come with all that baggage of complexity. And as someone who's now 60 years old, I can tell you, like for me personally, also with my complex background, it took me a while to get to where I felt really confident about who I was and why I was the way I was. And but it's been a great road. So, you know, most of you are a little bit younger, and it takes a while sometimes to get there and find yourself. So, but man, you are in a great place at UIW to really take that journey and make those leaps and bounds towards finding and crafting your identity. Thanks so much for being here. Thank you, Theo.
All right.
Thank you, Arturo.
So we'll
Thank
be
you,
back
Sister Martha.
at 1:30. So here's your break. Leave your stuff in here. You can come back for it later. Don't worry about it. And then enjoy some fun, and we'll be right back.